As the 2023 NFL Draft has just concluded, here are the winners and the losers of the 2023 NFL Draft class. Let's get right into this video. Starting off with the losers of the draft, I'm going to have the San Francisco 49ers. Now, it's not really their fault. They didn't have a first-round pick. They didn't have a second-round pick. They had a really late third-round pick that they ended up trading up in the draft for, and they got Jair Brown, which is probably the only pick that I really like in their entire draft class. And you can see that within their picks. They had Jake Moody in the third round, which is a little rich for a kicker. Cameron Latou, another guy that I thought was an overdraft, so did ESPN. And they just had a bunch of 5th round, 6th round, 7th round picks that probably won't get starter time. And the only real pick that I like in this draft, or that I really liked, was Jair Brown out of Penn State here for them. And that's really it. Another massive loser that I had in the 2023 NFL Draft was the Commanders. And it's not really the Commanders' fault, even though they did have a weak draft class. Every single one of their counterparts in the NFC East, except for the Cowboys, had a really good draft. The Giants had a really good draft, and the Eagles, of course, who made it to the Super Bowl, had a really good draft. But they also had a weak class. I thought Emmanuel Forbes was definitely a reach at 16. I had him just at I had him as my 9th cornerback or 10th cornerback in the draft class, and he went at 16 right before Christian Gonzalez, who was my number 1 cornerback. Jartavius Martin, I had a 4th round grade on, and he went in the middle of the 2nd round. And Nick Strongburn, I also didn't have highly graded, but the only pick that I really like here was Brandon Daniels. I thought that was good value in the 4th round. And then Chris Rodriguez, who I thought was underrated out of Kentucky. But outside of that, I think they did have a weak draft class, and then they're also losers because the Giants and the Eagles had such a good draft class. The hometown Kansas City Chiefs, I don't think had a great draft class. They picked Felix Ineduke-Uzoma at the tail end of the 1st round. I didn't think he was a first-round talent. I thought he was maybe in the 3rd round. He was right outside of my top 10 for edge rushers. I thought Rashee Rice was another guy who was way overdrafted. So did ESPN, as they had him ranked 124th. I had him outside of my top 10 receivers as well, and he went high in the 2nd round. And I did like the Wanya Morris pick, but outside of maybe Kendrick Corbin, they had a overall weak draft class, and I thought they just kind of mailed in picks that they really wanted, and they didn't really care where they took them. They wanted these players. They took them wherever they wanted to. So I do have them as one of the losers of the draft class. They didn't gain many starters, of course, but they're Super Bowl champions. Doesn't really matter. They're still going to be super competitive. I had Tampa Bay as another one of the losers in the draft class. I really liked the Cody Mock pick in the 2nd round. I think he's going to be a very good guard or tackle in the future. I mean, as soon as he learns and adjusts to the speed at the NFL level, of course, he's from North Dakota State, I think he could be a really good mauler in the run game. But then Kalijah Kancey, I thought, was far overdrafted at 19. I had a 3rd round grade on him. He is not good in the run game. I mean, it really doesn't matter because you got Vita Vea, who's probably going to get double teamed. Kalijah Kancey, I think, was a rotational pass rushing defensive tackle that was worth a 2nd round pick. And then outside of that, for me, they don't have anybody notable. So I think that they're one of the weaker draft classes as well. And then I think that they're going to have a much weaker year. And I don't think this was a draft class for the future. I think that they're still drafting as if they have a chance in the NFC South. And then for my last loser, they're barely squeaking in here. I'm going to have the Dallas Cowboys. I debated whether them having this on their list or not. However, the Mozzie Smith pick was another reach, in my opinion. The whole defensive tackle class I thought was weak overall, except for Jalen Carter. Mozzie Smith is a primary run defender, and that's kind of it. He's not going to be a pass rushing or heavily involved in the pass rushing game. That's going to be Micah Parsons. That's going to be DeMarcus Lawrence. Mozzie Smith is just going to probably be that run clogger up the middle. And Luke Schoonmaker was another way overdraft, in my opinion. There were better tight ends on the board, like Darnell Washington, who I thought who could have been a really good pick for Dallas here, even though I didn't think that they should have taken tight end even overall. Jake Ferguson had a good year last year. And then DeMarvion Overshown, I think, was the best pick out of all of them, including Deuce Vaughn, who I thought was decent value in the 6th. But overall, they didn't have anybody that really stood out. Mozzie Smith will probably be the only starter at this entire group, and then maybe DeMarvion Overshown. So I am going to have them as one of my losers. Starting off with the winners, I think that the Houston Texans had a really good draft class that's going to put them in the right direction in the rebuild. Really starting here, they got C.J. Stroud at their quarterback position. Now, of course, I have my question marks about C.J. Stroud. He is my 3rd quarterback, but if you think he's the future, then mail in that pick at 2. And then Will Anderson, they traded their 1st round pick next year to move all the way from 12 all the way to 3 to get Will Anderson, who was my 2nd overall player in the draft class. If you're going to move your 1st round pick next year, and you're probably going to win, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 games, you better hope that Will Anderson really does well and that the pick you have next year doesn't work out as well as Will Anderson. But I really like him. I think he's a phenomenal player. The only problem that I really have with this draft class is Juice Scruggs, who I thought was a crazy overdraft. I had him as a 5th-round grade. I had him as a guard coming out of Penn State because he flipped from guard to center, but they're going to draft him at center in the late 2nd round. Didn't love that pick. However, I thought that Nathaniel Dell, Dylan Horton, Henry Tuiotu, Jarrett Patterson, Xavier Hutchinson, and then Brandon Hill. I thought those were all good picks that made sense and that are going to be not only good value, like Henry Tuiotu, who's going to be your linebacker, Nathaniel Dell, and Xavier Hutchinson, who are going to help your receiving core a lot. Xavier Hutchinson on the outside, Nathaniel Dell in the slot. For C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson, you had a really good draft class. You're entering your rebuild in a very strong way with the number 2 and the number 3 overall pick. I like them as a winner for this draft class. And then, of course, right next to them, the Colts had a really good draft class this year. I mean, Anthony Richardson at 4, of course. You really, really hope that selection works as your quarterback for the future. But outside of Richardson, they had a phenomenal, really solid draft. Julius Brents, who was one of the better cornerbacks in this draft class, who had a phenomenal combine, who was really good at Kansas State last year. You had Josh Downs, who you're going to have in the slot for Anthony Richardson. You've got Blake Freeland, who could potentially be even a starter for that offensive line that was really shaky last year when it should have been good. Blake Freeland, another guy who's had a really good combine and had a good year at BYU. They got a lot of athletes. Anthony Richardson, 10.0 area score. Julius Brents, 9.9. Josh Downs is like the only exception, but Blake Freeland, phenomenal combine. Adetomiba Deboari, phenomenal combine. Daniel Scott is another guy that's athletic. Jelani Jones. They had a really solid draft class overall, and they made really good use of their picks, starting their rebuild out in Indianapolis with Shane Steichen as their new head coach. The main thing about this draft class is that you really hope that Anthony Richardson puts it all together, because if he doesn't, this ends up being one of the middle draft classes that I think. But if Anthony Richardson can put it together, this is a top 3 draft class. The Seahawks are another team that really killed this draft class. I like their draft class a lot. They picked Devin Witherspoon at 5. I thought he was a top 10 player in this draft class. ESPN had him at 7. I had him at 7. They're trying to rebuild that Legion of Boom because Devin Witherspoon can pack a punch. He's a very good tackler at the cornerback position. Even though he is smaller, he can definitely play on the boundary as he's a really good man cornerback. You pick up Jackson Smith-Njigba in the slot. He's another really solid guy, and that rounds out your entire receiver core. With him in the slot, Tyler Lockett on the Y, and then DK Metcalf in the X. Derek Hall was also, I think, was a bit of a reach in the early 2nd round, but you kind of make up for it with Zach Charbonnet, who's going to be your power back to mix in with Kenneth Walker. And then they also had some really solid guys like Oluwatimi, who's likely going to start at center for them next year, which is my prediction. They got a lot of starters. They got a lot of guys that are going to make an impact year 1, and that's really important as they're going to be a wild card team next year. And they just made it to the playoffs next year, but I think that they're 100% a playoff roster next year with these additions that are definitely going to, help them a lot. They could potentially even be a 10-win team. I like their draft class a ton. And then the 2 most obvious winners in this draft class are going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers and then the team that's coming next. But starting off with the Pittsburgh Steelers, they made a phenomenal trade up with the New England Patriots to jump the New York Jets to get Derrick Jones. I really love this pick. I gave this an A. Derrick Jones is my highest rated offensive tackle. He's super athletic, doesn't allow a lot of pressure, and it met your biggest need, which was offensive tackle. You're going to help Kenny Pickett a lot. They keep Joey Porter Jr. in Pittsburgh. Joey Porter Jr. went to Penn State, and his father, Joey Porter Sr., was a linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers when they won the Super Bowl back in 2008. You keep him in town. You keep that. And then you also get Keanu Benton, who I didn't have as super highly rated. He was my 5th or 6th highest rated defensive tackle, but super solid pick. And Darnell Washington was another really good pick. I had him in my top 50, so did ESPN. He's like a 6th offensive lineman. He is a red zone threat. He's humongous. Now you have a dual tight end system with Pat Freiermuth and now Darnell Washington. You pick Nate Herbig, who is a tweener. He's going to be a strong side linebacker who's going to rotate in at edge rusher. And then you get Corey Trice, who was a top 15 cornerback for me, who went in the middle of the 7th round. Overall, I don't think they had one major miss outside of maybe Spencer Anderson, who I don't know that much about. they did not really have a miss in this draft class. So they're going to be a massive, massive winner as they're coming off of a 9-8 season in the AFC North. They're going to compete next year. Have them as one of my winners. And then Philadelphia, of course, has to be the biggest winner of this draft class. They just made the Super Bowl. They lost a few key pieces on defense. But does it really matter because you're adding a bunch of really, really nice pieces on defense? You lose Javon Hargrave, cool. We'll get the best player in the draft class, in my opinion, in Jalen Carter. You get Nolan Smith on the outside, who has crazy bend as a smaller edge rusher, who also has that really good leadership there. The only pick that I didn't love for the draft class was Tyler Steen. But outside of that, Sidney Brown and Keely Ringo. Those are your safety tandem because you lose Marcus Epps and you lose C.J. Gardner-Johnson. You're going to get Sidney Brown, who is a ball-hawking safety, who's going to be that slot, who's going to mix into the slot, who's going to be at the free safety. That's your ball-hawking guy. And then Keely Ringo, who's got a ton of potential, who you're going to have to groom down the stretch. You know, he's not very good at man, but I think he could transition to another really good safety kind of player. I think they're going to probably move him to safety because he's got that length, he's got that size, he's got that speed. I think that him and Sidney Brown could be a really good safety duo down the board if they think that. And then you get Moro Ojobo, who was another really good pick, and then Tanner McKee is just going to be a backup. You got a lot of good guys that are going to compete right away. You have the camaraderie with a bunch of Georgia guys, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Keely Ringo, to go in with Jordan Davison and Kobe Dean, who you drafted last year. And they got a ton of good value at the slots that they got them at. Jalen Carter, number 1, went to 9. Nolan Smith was a top 20 guy. He went at 30. You have Keely Ringo, who was a top 50 guy. You take him really late. Moro Ojobo was a top 100 guy. You get him in the 7th round. They just had another phenomenal draft, so I'm going to have them as the biggest winner of the 2023 NFL Draft. So that's going to do it for this video. Let me know some of your winners and losers of the 2023 NFL Draft. Make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.